Welcome to part 2 of our deep dive into WWT's research paper, Building for Success, a CTO's Guide to Generative AI. Well, in part 1, we explored selecting the right use cases. Now comes the crucial question, how do you build infrastructure that can actually support them? Well, here's the reality. Enterprise generative AI isn't just another cloud deployment. It requires specialized, high-performance computing, breakthrough approaches to data governance, and infrastructure that most data centers weren't built to handle. CTOs face critical decisions: build versus buy, cloud AI or private clusters, how to establish an AI center of excellence that ensures security and governance. Well, today we're breaking down Worldwide Technology's enterprise architecture blueprint for Gen AI. You're going to see how organizations are solving these challenges, from GPU acceleration to responsible AI frameworks. And you're going to learn the infrastructure decisions that determine whether your Gen AI implementation scales or fails. Back with us are Worldwide Technology's AI implementation experts, Neil Anderson, VP of Cloud Infrastructure and AI Solutions. He helps enterprises build the foundation for AI transformation. And Mike Trojecki, Vice President of WWT's AI practice, who guides organizations in developing and implementing their AI strategies across multiple industries. My name is Rob Boyd. Welcome to WWT Presents Research.
WWT Presents Research.
All right, guys, welcome back. In part 1, we just talked about really the first 2 steps that a lot of people have been through portions of already, and hopefully lay the groundwork for how we're going to move that forward. But now as we look in part 2, we're really talking about the fact that, well, Gen AI it's a technology, it's a resource, it fits in so many different categories, but it's definitely something we can't ignore, and it has an effect. The decisions we have to make here are going to affect infrastructure. They're going to affect a lot of other areas besides maybe just the ones we're thinking about. And I want to make sure that we're comprehensive on that with you guys. So as we dive into enterprise architecture and operations side of the talk here on this back half of the list that we've got on screen, Neil, when organizations are ready to move kind of beyond strategy and they're getting into implementation, they're going to start hitting these infrastructure questions. Hopefully they've already resolved them. But what are the first kind of infrastructure things people tend to experience?
You want to make sure that you've got an idea about how you're going to approach security and governance of the data. And let's assume that you're past that point, and now you're looking at, all right, I'm ready to really dig in and I want to run some AI workloads. I think one of the key decisions that we often hear is, well, where should I run them? Should I run them in cloud? Should I, build an on-premise infrastructure to run them? They're probably not going to be able to run on your general compute infrastructure, although some of it may. But most likely, you're going to need a more purpose-built AI architecture to be able to run these workloads. So where should I do that? Should I take advantage of what are the tremendous resources that are available in cloud to do that? Or should I invest in something private, right? And that's typically a big decision that our customers are weighing every day. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. What is the risk of me putting my data out in a public cloud? And maybe it's my most sensitive property, and maybe I don't want to do that. What is the cost going to be? Do I even have the capability of standing up a private infrastructure to do it? Or do I just need to rely on doing it in a public cloud? All these decisions our customers weigh. The way I look at it is, it's a little bit like some of our customers approach it as a binary decision. Am I going to put it in cloud, or am I going to run it on-prem? I think that's kind of the wrong question. The reality is most of our customers are going to run it in all of the above. It just depends on the use case. Some use cases, it makes perfect sense to go start in cloud and go get it going, right? And you can get some speed there. Other use cases, maybe it's sensitive data. You're going to run that in your data center, right?
Yeah.
So it's really that's kind of how I think about it and how I advise customers to think about it.
In the previous episode, we talked with Jennifer Adafala and Kurt Stallhood about edge and really looking at those use cases in a general sense that we're going to need a solution that had more of a proximity. And so I like the fact that you're saying it's really dependent on the use case. Mike, I'm on the build versus buy, and some of those questions are coming up. I assume your team's running into that, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look at this from, all right, where can I deploy this? Is it going to be cloud? Is it going to be on-prem? Is it going to be a hybrid situation? Am I putting this in a colo facility? Am I looking at like GPU as a service, AI as AI platform as a service? I mean, the options are just overwhelming.
Yeah.
So again, you have to be able to look, like Neil just mentioned this, and going back to our previous episode in part one, starting small. A lot of our customers are going to start in the cloud, right? And at that point, you run through those kind of 8 steps. You're going to determine whether this stays in the cloud or you need to bring this back on-prem. If you're doing, a RAG model that is involving your own data and there's some security concerns, you're going to wind up putting that in an on-prem type model or a hybrid type model, right? If there are things that you may not need from, maybe it's not a real-time application, there are things that you can do from an analytics standpoint, maybe they stay in the cloud. But there are certain situations or certain scenarios where you have to look at the cost, you have to look at the scalability, you have to look at the manageability, obviously the reliability of it. And you look at those things and you have to say, okay, when I determine where I am going to put this workload or where I'm going to run this solution, you've got to look at those things. Is it secure? Is it scalable? Is it manageable? Is it reliable? Right? There are a couple of the key points there that I would tell our audience here, focus in those areas.
Do you find, either of you, has there been a challenge to get people to understand? Because we all want to say this is just like an application I'm deploying and AI is just another really big complex application, but it's really not. There's aspects of it that mirror that, but I feel like there's more danger on that curve. Any thoughts on how people need to kind of shift the paradigm on how they look at that? Either one of you.
I mean, do you want a solution that's running completely in the cloud where you're doing safety and security in a manufacturing plant, where you're using computer vision and somebody's putting their hand in an area of a production line they shouldn't, or they're walking into an area where they shouldn't? You're going to want real-time data for that.
Yeah.
In some cases, can it be in the cloud? But you're probably going to want to run some of that stuff in an on-prem or a hybrid environment, especially when it comes to real-time AI applications.
So you mentioned RAG, and I think that's a popular. So retrieval-augmented generation is really about it. When we talk about reducing hallucinations and getting value out of your data, this is really about a model where you're dealing with this is where I want you guys to correct me, but as I understand it, you've got a model that's been trained, and now you're augmenting it with your unique data for a certain outcome. Is that roughly correct? And what's important to understand about that? Because I know that's not the only way, of course, to do these things, and it just depends on the application.
Yeah, and this is evolving very quickly, and I think when the first chatbots came out, they're typically looking at that foundational model, right? Like a ChatGPT or others. And the model only knows what the model knows, right? So you could ask it, and they're kind of built to answer any question.
Yeah. And confidently answer, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Exactly. And very confidently, and there's some hallucination. That quickly evolved into RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, because there was a need for two things. Number one is, how do I reduce those hallucinations? And number two is, how do I augment it with my own private information? Mm-hmm. Most of those models are trained on public information, right? They don't know anything about an organization's private information. So if I'm trying to solve a problem for my organization, the foundational models don't know anything about my business, right?
Right.
Chances are. Unless I've had some kind of exposure that I don't know about. But so what RAG does is it allows you to augment that with your own private information. And then you're talking about solving real organizational problems that are tailored to your business, right? The best analogy I've heard of this is, and I borrowed it and I use it every day, is, using a public model like a ChatGPT, it's a closed book test. Right? The model knows what the model knows. And if it doesn't know the answer, you're going to get the answer wrong on the test. Yeah. RAG is an open book test. It is able to, it's able to open that book and say, I don't know the answer to this, but I know where to go find it. Right. And then augment that answer, and you're going to get a much better result that way.
Do you guys agree or think it's helpful for any CTOs, anyone watching this that just hasn't taken the time to, and it's hard to imagine that anybody hasn't, but people are busy, play with, say, Notebook LLM from Google, and because their model's been very interesting. It got a lot of praise for these, the NPR style podcast it can turn out on your stuff, which is fascinating. Although it can seem you see the structure really quickly if you've done a few of them, but the idea of being able to say, I only want to answer questions around the data that I've given you. And then, of course, there's versions of that with Anthropic, with ChatGPT, and everybody's just constantly trying to outcompete each other as we say, here, take more of my personal data as you go tell me something smart with it. But do you think that playing with those things to at least get a feel for what's possible, does that help with a mind shift, you think, in terms of people understanding where to work with this?
Yeah, I would tell you, again, going back to some of the things we talked about in part one, Rob, is, experiment. Go out there and do this stuff knowing that it is not going to be perfect, right? Design without fear is the way we like to talk about it. So go out there, use the different models, try it. But when we come to RAG, one of the benefits of a RAG model is being able to use your own data. And yes, it does hallucinate, like we've talked about before. But you need to have a feedback mechanism. So as you're using and identifying what are the sources that RAG model is going to use, again, it's going to use some public information, but it's going to use your private information. You need to have a feedback loop in there that says, okay, this response that I got back, is this a good response? And give the ability to comment on why it was or wasn't a good response. That's one of the things that we're doing internally with our own teams is, when we go into Adam and we say, hey, tell me all of the use cases that we've done for RAG, for example, for our customers, and it spits back the information. We have the ability to go back in and thumbs up, thumbs down, and give a comment to say, yep, these are the right use cases. Sometimes it's wrong, but most times it's right. And as we keep giving that feedback within our own RAG model, it gets better and better, and we get less hallucinations. So, I would tell you that, that to me is one of the more critical pieces when we're talking about the retrieval augmented generation piece of this.
Before we move on to governance and security, and I don't expect either of you guys to, we'd leave that to the end, as we always have historically. But I don't expect you guys to be experts on that stuff. But I have another question before we get to that for a second. And this is around, because I think this is growing a lot and we're going to get more questions on it. But what is, Neil, I'll start with you. What is agentic AI? And what's important to understand about that? Because I think it's actually kind of an exciting area too.
Yeah, it's a really important development. And I almost look at it as the next evolution of RAG in a way. But if you look at the first phases of this phenomenon of Gen AI, there was a lot of focus on who can build the biggest model with the most parameters and information, in it. But you quickly realized, but you don't have any private information in there. So, how useful is it really to solve these very specific problems for organizations? And that's where RAG came in. So now I'm augmenting that huge model with the information that's private and that I really care about, right? How to do something for my organization. Agentic AI, I think, is the next evolution of this whole architecture. If you think about the future, with agentic, you're going to have much smaller models that are very purpose built, and you're going to have agents that are going to go and talk to those individual models to get specific parts of the piece of the puzzle that you're trying to assemble for the prompt that the user has created. And then you're going to assemble that all back up into a response. So, and I think that's the future. Is it's not going to be one chat application to one big model. It's going to be break down that the thing that the user's trying to understand or based on their prompt, go out to these smaller data sources that are very finely tuned for specific aspects of that, and then be able to bring that back together into a comprehensive response.
Because it's taking actions on your behalf, right? And so it's kind of freeing things up to, as opposed to, I love apps nowadays where I can make a reservation for a restaurant, use OpenTable or Resi or something like this. But then these things are getting further to where they'll actually just do the reservation for you. And I think we're already starting to see, I'll have my chatbot call your chatbot. And that's an oversimplification, of course, because it's not just chatbots. And that may not be the interface that we all work with AI. Because I think AI, in my opinion, Mike, curious what you think. I feel like that's going to a certain extent, some of the end goals is it enhances a lot of things and kind of becomes a component of everything else, as opposed to being something we have to think about so individually, perhaps if we're not in technology. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, and like Neil just talked about on the agentic AI side, I mean, the ability, I mean, just take it from a personal standpoint, for me to be able to go out to some AI using whatever model you want to use to be able to say, hey, I am looking to travel these dates. I'm willing to pay this much money, and I want to go and stay here and do these things, these excursions, just from a personal standpoint. Looking at agentic AI, you may have the initial interface into that agent, but then it's got all these sub agents that could come down and say, okay, one's booking, flights, one's looking for the flight costs, one's booking the flight, one's looking at hotels, one's looking at excursions. And basically you have your own personal concierge at that point. But from a business standpoint of being able to take the tasks, the repetitive tasks that we do every day, and taking robotic process automation to a different level of, okay, I need you to do this. You're talking to your AI, and that AI says, okay, I'm going to do these things, taking the information in Excel or a smart sheet, creating this information, putting it in this dashboard, all of those different pieces of the things that it will be able to do. And the future of AI and agentic AI is, I mean, that to me that's where AI becomes really, really useful, right? Yeah. And we work a lot with our service providers. We work with a lot of these companies that are developing these models. And sure, we build those kind of the infrastructure piece for them to be able to do that. But the other part of that is working with our customers that are, how do we consume it? How do we consume these agentic AI solutions? I mean, now you're going to get me geeking out on a whole bunch of really cool things, but I'll leave it at that. Maybe we have a whole separate kind of podcast or blog on agentic AI.
What's funny is I feel like there's some thoughts that I've always had about the contact center space, which is one of my favorite spaces for measurable results in terms of making changes. And we see a lot happening with AI and how they're assisting agents with better just-in-time information for these super agents that can handle, getting some pretext information that could help them resolve a call in a more efficient manner. But when I think about these, automated phone trees and stuff that we've probably all sold at different parts of our careers, and that we run into constantly, I call the pharmacy or something. I always feel like, if I've worked with a business, I tend to know my doctor's got a horrible one, but another organization's got a great one. It's like, how do I know that I'm dealing with something more intelligent? Do I have to wait to push a tone, or can I speak? That was one that kind of comes up a lot nowadays. And, because sometimes, boy, those systems will punish you if you try to go off in a different direction. And I feel like as things get smarter too, it's like, how do you signal that you're operating at that level to the consumers of your technology or something? These are fun problems to have, but it's like, it said hello, just like the other one did. Now what? Can I say I want to speak to the pharmacist and not have it argue with me that I need to enter in a bunch of stuff that I don't care about? You know what I mean?
Hit 5 times.
Yeah, exactly. My daughter had texted me today because I was following up. That's why it's on my mind. And she goes, Dad, can you just call for me? Because she was busy. And she goes, if you just press 4 at Tom Thumb's, go right to their pharmacy. So in talking about governance, the main thing I want to ask about is, because you guys, I say it as Worldwide Technology, I know that you've driven these concepts in a lot of other areas as well, but I'm seeing this come up again, and this idea of a center of excellence, or a COE. For AI, Neil, what does an AI COE do for a CTO? How does it become part of the plan that you guys are proposing for practical AI?
Yeah, what we typically see happen is organizations start with islands of AI experimentation, right? So every line of business may start their own AI initiative. And, that does a couple of things. First of all, it can be fairly inconsistent and frustrating It can also be a little bit risky if you don't have some guardrails around, what are we going to do and not do. And quite frankly, you can repeat the wheel multiple times, right? Because what you've learned over here is not really, transferable to what you're trying to do over here, but just because people aren't talking. What a center of excellence is meant to do is solve a lot of those challenges, right? Where now you're kind of centralizing that knowledge and also setting some common guidelines. Look, if we're going to experiment with AI as an organization, let's set some parameters about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. How are we going to transfer learnings around so that we can get the flywheel effect of, once we've solved this problem once, we can solve it 5 more times for 5 more use cases across our business, which is really what we're trying to do with when we offer customers a center of excellence and we can help them build that. That's what we're trying to achieve is really that velocity and mitigate the risks along the way of that velocity, right?
And I feel like you guys have, as you're reminding me, you guys have taught me some of these things because I found it very helpful in the simplest sense when I'm working on trying to change something in my workflow, or I'm working on a simple script or something like this, is it really helps if I first identify what my objectives are so that I know when to stop. Because my ADD, my addled brain, I go off in these different directions and I pretty much, and I will lose. And I just, organizationally, I see this happen, is you lose track of, well, what were we trying to accomplish in the first place? Maybe we already did it, and we need to evaluate, or maybe we're wasting time and we need to reassess. Mike, do you have any thoughts in that area?
Yeah, we go back again to part 1. We talked about the importance of use cases. Yeah. And we also talked about the importance of kind of the strategic alignment piece of this, right? Is making sure that this, building this center of excellence allows you to make sure that the initiatives that you're putting in place are very closely aligned to the business's goals, right? The strategic, objectives of the business. And you look at that, and there's a number of different kind of objectives of this, of the center of excellence. And you look at, the compliance piece, making sure that you have the right governance frameworks in place, making sure that you're adhering to kind of corporate best practices and standards, right? And then kind of you've got a number of different areas. You've got reducing optimization or resource optimization, where you're looking at the talent, technology, and the data and really maximizing the impact on the business. It gives you the ability to share knowledge within that group so that you can look and take all those things we just talked about, from the strategic alignment through all the talent and technology pieces, and be able to share that across different organizations within the business. Because you can have one, like Neil talked about, the flywheel and solving for, take this and solve across different areas. If you can share that information across different business units, that's critical, right? And it reduces the amount of time it takes to develop new solutions. And then a big part of this, and we talked about this in moving from, proof of concept to scale and to production deployment, is really monitoring and measuring, right? Looking at the performance, looking at the impact that AI is having, and looking at those metrics that you've set in place. Critical. So all of those things are key components to this kind of concept of this kind of AI Center of Excellence, or COE.
Well, and I like that you're also reminding me that it becomes a place when we say, gosh, it's so hard to get all the right people together with the internal organizational knowledge because they have different bosses and different things. This gets back to there's got to be kind of an executive level sponsorship with something this big, but this AI center becomes almost like a subcommittee or a way to bring people in and say, hey, we don't need to worry about organizational. This is a very special thing to be on, and a way to reward some people perhaps at certain levels. So I think there's a couple of good things to take away from that one. The last thing I want to ask about is, because you guys deal with architecture so much, but this notion of high performance architecture. And just at a brief level, Neil, what is HPA and what's important there? Is this part of what makes the data center so different of an environment for AI versus maybe how we've used to think about it?
Yeah, what we have found is that there are some problems that can be solved with traditional architecture, right? The architecture in the data center that you have today. There are other AI problems that are probably going to take some very specialized architecture. And what we mean by that is typically specialized compute. GPUs are in the news. I think that's becoming a, when you first heard the term GPU, most people didn't know what that was even referring to. But today it's becoming a common term. You hear it every day. But those are very, very fast specialized processors that happen to be really good at doing the math that AI requires to produce these kinds of generative responses. And so it's critical that you have a capacity of those high performance compute nodes to be able to do it. The second is then, how do I get the right data into those GPUs in a really, really fast manner so I can saturate them, get the fastest response out of them, and get my investment out of them, right? They're very expensive things. And so, high performance networking becomes really important to be able to network all of that data into those GPUs at scale. And these models are very data intensive. They're compute intensive. And then the network is bringing those together, right? All of that data, massive amounts of data, getting them in and out of that high performance compute is just absolutely critical, or you're going to have bottlenecks, right? So when we say high performance architecture, that's what we're referring to is a really kind of a purpose-built architecture for AI workloads that considers the compute, the storage, the network, and the software that runs on that to manage it, to orchestrate it, to get that data in and out of the architecture as quickly as you need.
The HPA side of things and the way we have built the organization to help our customers is we've built around those things that Neil just talked about, the high performance compute, high performance storage and networking, right? We're starting to see, a lot of conversations around things like InfiniBand versus Ethernet, and is Ethernet good enough? We're starting to see the storage components with some of the emerging storage players that are focused on AI. And then you look at a lot of, like Neil said, on the software side, but also on the ML ops side of things, when you talk about, some of the automation pieces there. The HPA piece is critical. But again, if you've got to make that decision on where you're going to deploy AI. Is it going to be cloud? Is it going to be in a hybrid situation? Is it going to be on-prem? A colo facility? What type of platform? GPU
as a service they're doing. Yeah.
Right. So as you look at that, the HPA becomes a critical piece of, if you're an enterprise customer, of what you're going to build on-prem. If you are, a service provider or, a web scale provider or, a global PHY, most likely you're going to be relying on your own high performance architecture. And if you don't take into consideration, all those pieces, and also, which we haven't really talked about, is the power and cooling pieces of this. I mean, that in the high performance architecture, that's the thing that I wake up in the morning thinking about is, okay, I have a customer that's going to deploy this high performance architecture. How are they going to cool it? How are they going to power it? What do the facilities look like? Right.
Yeah.
And, we can save that for another episode.
Well, you guys have great information on your platform about that too, because we did a show on that as well with a couple of experts from your side, and it's amazing. I had not realized how much the density has gotten to this point where it's not about filling a rack. You're not going to fill the rack, because you wouldn't get enough power to the rack. You can't have enough cooling to that rack. It's just the math is different. And I guess as we wrap things up here with part 2 as well, is it feels like don't bet against Ethernet. I always feel like that's a safe thing. We don't know for sure yet what's going to happen here, but I feel like there's we didn't talk a lot about the skill sets people need and stuff, but I know there's a lot of very smart people that understand, more people that understand Ethernet, I feel like, than understand InfiniBand. I feel like that's going to work in its favor because it never won in the past because it was the best technology. But we all understand it and we know what it can do and can't do. But what you guys are teaching me too, which is question everything. We can't assume this is just another technology that we're going to roll out like a new application. Maybe it's a big one or not, but really this has the potential. It's changing businesses. There's been stuff in the news around education companies that are having their entire business model just rocked because of how students are using technology differently. So it's moving fast and we all need to stay on top of it. And it helps to have a trusted advisor next to us when we're doing these things. So feel free to comment on any of this that you think is important to remember when it comes to taking the next step. Mike, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Neil. But final thoughts.
Again, go back to those 8 steps, right? Start small as that 8th step, but focus the use cases around a business objective, right? And start there. Keep in mind that you need to design without fear, but also design with the concepts of, hey, is it secure? Is it scalable? Is it manageable? Is it reliable? Right? Those things are critical when you're looking at starting in this AI space.
Yeah. In other words, we can't be thinking about it, oh, I'm going to deal with this when I get to that step. These are kind of things that have to happen in parallel, similar to how the processing works, I guess. Very good points. Neil, final thoughts?
There's been a lot of discussion about the ROI of AI, right? When am I going to get the value out of it? And sometimes I think that's the wrong question. When you think about the internet, people questioned, what was the value going to be of this? What's the ROI of this thing called the internet? I'm old enough to remember when that was created. I think you might be too, Rob. But
I try to hide it.
But it's almost the wrong question. Looking back on the internet now, people almost look at what was the ROI? That's a foolish question, right? I mean, it has transformed the way that businesses operate, the way that consumers operate, the way that we run our lives has just fundamentally changed. So whatever it cost, it's been worth it, I would say, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to look back on AI, and it's going to be a similar thought process. We're going to say, wow, asking about the ROI was kind of the wrong question. It's about, look at the ways that this has transformed the way organizations do business, the way we personally work, the way we run our lives. Back to Mike's kind of trip planner example, like that stuff is going to be very common in the future, and we're going to. What is the ROI of that? It almost doesn't matter. What we're doing is building a foundation up for how we're going to live our lives and how businesses are going to operate for the next 20 plus years.
Yeah. No, that's a great, the internet, I think, is a great example of that. I also think mobility and smartphone computing, it really felt like there were early days. There were so many people, and I can't think of anybody now. Do you know anybody that's successfully held out from using the internet, or, their business is not somehow. It's just funny, the arguments that we would have, and who knows what we're going to have next, right? That's what's always fun about this, because there are a lot of nuances to this technology, but it's something we've all got to play with, because it's a reality. We can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, and nor do we want to. It's a great way to do things, but we got to do it right and protect the IP and the stuff that's important to our companies and our ability to move forward, be competitive. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Mike, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you.
Absolutely. And Neil, you as well.
Always great, Rob.
All right. I hope you've had a chance to watch both episodes. So we covered the complete AI implementation journey, and we've been following Worldwide Technology's comprehensive framework that they've written quite well in their paper, Building for Success, a CTO's Guide to Generative AI. This means you should now have a practical roadmap for moving from strategic use cases to enterprise-grade infrastructure. The AI landscape is moving fast, and organizations taking a practical approach, they're gaining significant competitive advantages. All right, I've got just a couple of quick ways for you to get started. First and foremost, please be sure and download the research paper. There is a lot more detail in there, and it is very well worth your time. And then you should at least follow Worldwide Technology's Gen AI topic page for ongoing insights and implementation guides. Good stuff in there, and they'll keep you up to date. You can also experience AI solutions firsthand at WWT's AI Proving Ground. You can visit WWT.com to access these resources and begin your AI journey. Their practical approach can help you turn AI's potential into measurable business value. My name is Rob Boyd. Thank you for watching WWT Presents Research.
This episode is brought to you by Proofpoint. Proofpoint helps protect people, data, and brands against cyber attacks, offering compliance and cybersecurity solutions for email, data loss, cloud, and more.